this nonsense.
This is like a precursor to things. This is an amuse-bouche. Investors and consumers would then reward companies who had this strong sustainability performance and put pressure on those who lag. Like, it makes sense. And then ways to measure the impact would become more rigorous, accurate, widely accepted. The author calls this like a cycle. Like, you think it would all come together, but the long and short of it is the rules of the game are not changing at all. So like the system is not actually being incentivized to change. So people are just getting, I don't know, fancy at how they report on these things because it looks good. And then they might find ways to improve efficiencies for their company, but like at the end of the day, the impact is at the individual corporate or company level, and it's not at like a shared global or societal level. So it's not really doing anything. I mean,
there's no leverage on the thing.
But yeah. So I mean, it's superficial. There's no depth in what is attempting at being what they're trying to change, which is frustrating.
Yeah.
I fell into the trap of thinking it was great because it seems great. Like there's so much effort that goes into this too, but yeah. I got to read one thing.
Is this just reporting? Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead. I have to find the quote.
Well, yeah, I was wondering if this is like purely reporting or like where does carbon offsets come in relation to this?
It's part of it.
Is it like okay, so it's technically under the umbrella because I just saw Patrick Colson retweet one of the new startups, which looked pretty interesting. They're doing carbon capture, I think, of some sort,
That's
active, cool. If I remember correctly, and. Yeah, like I've seen a lot of debate around that. Like I've been offsetting most of my flights as well. Like, but it to some extent feels very like I'm just paying a little tax, you know, to ease my guilt and move the feelings somewhere else. And like this, I met the founder of this company. Like I reasonably kind of trust like this, you know, the way they're doing things. But when I think about massive corporations doing this and the transaction fees on these. With, you know, approaching hundreds of thousands of dollars, my spidey senses start tingling for sure.
How do you offset your carbon emissions for flights? I actually wanted to look into this because I flew on JetBlue recently and they're like, this flight has been, and I was like, what? And I was journaling and I was like, I think it's bullshit. I was like, I don't believe anything that a corporation tells me.
Yeah, so some airlines are starting to do it now, but the service that I use is air.care, air like as in AIR.care, and you literally just forward your confirmation email to them. They do the estimation and then give you a little credit card form. And it was actually like I kind of basically I was in an online hackathon that was another team's project, and honestly I think it was one of the best ones. Like their UX is so slick and clean, and yeah, it's like seems like pretty legitimate person. So yeah, usually it's like, you know, in domestic flights will be like $20 to $30 ish. That's kind of like the range there, and that's definitely cheaper than. What was that?
Do they plant trees or something? Like what did they?
Yeah, do? So they basically donated the money to a charity that plants trees. So they don't do it themselves, but they do essentially like become that middleman. They open source all of the receipts and stuff, and they specifically look for they did like research for charities that match some level of certification. So it's not just like, you know, fly by night charity. Again, that's like this is like a little 3-step process, and already you have like these questions of, well, where is this money going, and how is it actually being calculated? And all of these are really back to the napkin calculations because, you know, every plane is different, every like flight path is but this is, you know, a step closer anyway.
Comes back to so carbon emissions, there's like 3 scopes for how they measure it, and it's the first scope is like what's directly under the control of like the company. So I think get my notes, like they're like facilities and vehicles, like I'm sure there's other things that fall under this. And then the second scope is who, like where they're purchasing energy or energy, electricity from, because that's going to be a huge carbon emission that you can sort of like isolate. But then the third scope is like the kitchen sink. So all other upstream and downstream emissions, suppliers, distributors, employees, business travel, and the usage of products sold. And that is really hard to report on
Oh,
because it's like
oh, that's a big
crazy
asterisk.
complex. So,
Yeah.
like, if people are reporting on the first two scopes, like, that's great. But if they can't report on the third one, and so the author of this article was from, he was a COO at Timberland, I guess, for a while, the consumer goods, like Timberland boots, that
Mhm.
kind of stuff. Like, I think it's just clothing, but I don't know. But he said, I think it was like 85% of their carbon emissions were thought to be found in the scope 3, and they couldn't report on it because they didn't know how to be able to track all of the different, like,
Wow.
yeah.
Of course.
So what's the point in like reporting on the 15%
Yeah.
is kind of my point. Like,
Right.
okay.
Yeah, I saw Apple's latest announcement. They're like something, all of our factories will be carbon neutral by 2030. I'm just like, okay, like that's cool.
Okay,
Thank you. How big of that slice of the pie are we talking about?
Yeah.
Like how, I
Yeah.
mean, how much energy do your factories actually take? And like I think most of the people transporting iPhones are like not calculated in that at all. And like
No.
if they're using giant like fuel, I don't know. Yeah, it's like
Yeah.
at least show me a chart
No,
and like
yeah.
how close are we to that?
And
Because
how,
it makes it sound like that's it. That we've done it. 2030. That's it. We're gonna be like
Yep.
good. It's like no, nope.
you're oversimplifying probably somehow. Yeah, and like all of the things that you can't do with your iPhone, like where does the line get drawn? So like when does it become like Uber's problem if you're taking an Uber, or like
Yeah.
food, or you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
I don't know.
totally.
Yeah, so another piece that's interesting is most of the reporting doesn't look at ecological limits constraining economic growth, and then even few reporting, or those who report, acknowledge planetary boundaries. So like finite resource, like they're just like sort of like skirting that. They're like,
Yeah,
oh
we got asteroids. It'll be fine.
yeah,
Mm,
Yeah.
don't worry about the Earth like as like the like sort of like backstop to all of this. We don't have to talk about that. So it's what they're reporting on is just not really meaningful. All right, this is my last
Wow.
thing. Global subsidies for fossil fuels topped $5 trillion in 2017. In the United States, tens of billions of dollars have gone to subsidies for biofuels, including ethanol. And then the author says, this makes no sense. Like, we are using taxpayer money to subsidize energy sources that accelerate future environmental damage. Imagine if governments instead invested
and future taxes.
and like carbon capture. So like that seems promising. Like the company, what is it, Stripe? With
No, so Stripe was their first client. I don't remember the name of the company.
Yeah, so hopefully we'll start to see things that are moving in a way that are actually like, so the big thing is like not just reporting, but actual impact on the planet and other like societal goals that we have. Not just, are you still making money? That's good for you and your corporation, but what about the rest of the world?
Yep.
And that's that.
That's that. What else?
Interesting. That 85% really hit me. It was just like, wow, there's,
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like I guess if they are reporting this 15%, there's like actually like a huge market opportunity there to, but I think that that's really what's tying into maybe your initial curiosity into like these blockchain stuff, huh, Kristen?
There you go.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, and like my brother works in transportation logistics, and he's got interesting ideas to start his own thing eventually. I think, was it supply chain? So I don't know, just trying to sort of break things down. Like I'm thinking, be interested in something like this. Is it too like, are we too early in the technological like advancement for how to effectively decentralize supply chain logistics for him? Like that's not his area of expertise. Like would it be that he needs to hire someone, or is there something more fundamental,
Mhm.
fundamental and foundational right now that needs to emerge on the scene for someone like my brother to like take that technology and plug it into what he knows, if that makes any sense. Like, yeah.
There's
Yep.
there's a
Those-
pathway to like technological adoption, right? And usually the energy will find its way to the lowest hanging fruit, and then in that lowest hanging fruit you'll get the like early development of like whatever works, right? Like in a lot of stuff like user interface design or like business practices, whatever, the all of the energy and talent goes towards the thing that has status, that has this kind of stuff. So if you tie like environmental concerns, which people have, and they're becoming conscious about this, to like those status flows and these kinds of, those become the most interesting projects. That's going to take a while though, right? Because money is still incredibly attractive. And so the idea is, if you can potentially like start tying up incentive structures and status to things that are helpful for the planet, then you can maybe create an ecosystem where this is possible, right? But yeah, like the easy stuff is going to be virtualized first, probably. Like this is where you're getting things like art markets, which are a lot more malleable.
Yeah.
Where you're seeing innovation there, because the type of thinker that exists in art markets is a lot more like sort of mobile laterally in their thinking, where something is as sort of physical as a supply chain or housing atoms. Or exactly, atoms are going to go. But if you get the patterns built in the virtual, and they and part of some of the patterns that are being built in the virtual are connecting to the atoms, like these things they are just better. Like, so like the talent will flow towards efficiency, but who knows how long that takes. The adoption rate on this stuff is moving faster and faster. So
We got to like a lateral thinking move with the concept of like geographic social serendipity, like we were talking about, like with Buzzard, like if you could see where someone was on a closed network, and then
John, you were talking about that.
It's like efficiency in collision or something, like that's what serendipity is. So like if you could like map that onto supply chains where things just happen to be in the right place at the right time, either for like the next level of like distribution, or maybe it's consumption. There's just more efficiency in the system then. But I don't know how this works at any sort of,
well, this is back to the like big data sets, and then like figuring out like constraint models for your like your querying or whatever. This is where all that machine learning, like the Tesla stuff that they're doing, like that mentality around software 2.0 or whatever. I was the like director of AI at Tesla was talking a lot about this, like how they're managing their data sets and like the design methodology they have for interacting with them, like basically writing like tiny amounts of code I need to understand this better, but like then creating boundary conditions within the like data sets to figure out what is important to do to solve next, or like in the anyways, I need to go back over that stuff, but these things connect in that sense for sure.
I think I have like, at least some conception there is like more like you want your data to be like super clean and good, and you're building software to make your data better, basically, right? Because you want that for the machine learning model is it can be cleaned up, but then like it does have all these like kind of like arbitrary factors, and it's like creating a rule set around that. And maybe that's the boundary that's talking about, is like, what is that rule set that's like going to define this data as good data or bad data kind of a thing, or even just labeling it and making it useful.
So that's their like push is data set centric rather than model centric. Like just getting these large, and they're one of the things that was interesting that's related to the stuff that we're doing is they've got like just teams of humans I forget all the nomenclature on this, but like, so yeah, that's one of the areas of, so they've got all of these people who are labeling the sensor data that's coming in, right? And they're building all this internal tooling to like have a round robin approach to this, so that like they're labeling things and then they're writing like algorithms to bubble up the things that are most important to be labeled. And so they're creating this like Photoshop like platform for their labelers, right?
Yeah.
And
wild.
so, you know, they've got this entire workforce training these models, and what they're trying to move towards is the like, you know, like the algorithm learning, right? And the way that they're doing this is like sort of this constraint ecological thing. I have a video on this, like, I need to go back through it. I can send it over.
Yeah,
where he
actually, it's I think it is called Software 2.0 by it's Andre.
That's
something I forget. I have some notes on it too, because I watched it a while back.
That's related to the kind of thing that we're talking about doing. Like, so having
100%.
Yeah. Anyways.
I mean, it's interesting you mentioned that as like related, because I think I've been running into that boundary a lot. Even now, like I just started a stopwatch so I can like timestamp this as best as possible in real time.
Yep.
Whereas like it would be really nice to even just have like a basic annotation system of being able to capture this information, and that is data labeling. That's like exactly data labeling.
Yep.
So
absolutely.
Yeah, building better data labeling methodologies, and maybe even from different perspectives. Like I guess they're looking at it specifically from how do we like train a car to drive itself. You know, it's like you're just building an interface for that like specific data label, but you could translate that same video into something else, and it's just more data on the same thing, and you can just pull out different pieces of specific labeled data that you actually want. So I've been thinking a lot about that, like kind of annotation layer, because it's like I'm just running into it everywhere. Like going back through our last call, I was like, oh, I want to do this, and I was like, I want to link this to the other videos that we're talking about, and like start to build a graph of all this. And I'm like, holy shit, like this is like so impossible to do without like a piece of, well, you can build these files and you're like, oh my god, these files are insane, like I just need like a visual representation of it. And like that's where like the graph, I think, like really starts to come into play.
Yeah, and so this is the one thing that they're not talking about, or he's not talking about, because this is where the value is. So like watch these presentations, and the things that they leave out that are like proprietary Tesla technology, they'll talk about how they're doing it, and then you're like, okay, so how are you making that software, and how do those algorithms work? And he's just like, it's fine. Oh, over here, look over at that. So I'm like, okay, so that's what's important. Either they don't know what they're doing, which I don't think is the case, or that's where all the like competitive value is. So yeah, like figuring out, this is where like sort of trying to map these relationships, like visually, if there's a diagramming language or something like that, can start to give us like a feeling for the structure, so that we can tie it into an interface, so that it's possible so that normal people can do this annotation layer and stuff, and then we can collect that data in the cleanest way possible, right? And so this is sort of pointing to a protocol of some sorts here. Like, so well, I don't remember where we were. Oh, in
Software 2.0.
The graph.
Oh yeah, that video that you linked up is the video that I watched. So yeah, we're sniffing around the same stuff, I guess. That's
I can share my notes too. I literally like, pulled it up in my notebook like as I was sitting here, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember this thing. This is one of the first things I wrote about in my notebook.
Yeah, from that I figured out like, all right, so I like followed Andrew K.
Kaparthy, I think.
I just started poking around, like seeing what recordings he had around, and there was like a Clubhouse thing with him and like a couple other like lead AI type folks at, you know, bigger places, and they were on, so they recorded the Clubhouse thing and put it on YouTube, and it's fun to listen to these things because you can very quickly see where the limits of the understanding are because you have people asking questions and like proposing models, and then, you know, you had some academics and then some like, you know, industry folks, and they're just sort of like talking about like a few new papers that came out with like, you know, clip or I don't know, half these things. And yeah, you can see where the tensions are and how they're trying to approach these things and how data is, you know, like having the cleaner data sets, large data sets, and then, you know, these methodologies. So yeah, it's an interesting way of like sort of figuring out where the tensions are in industry and where they're trying to push ahead. So yeah, I don't know, it's a good maturity measure. So it was interesting. But yeah, how this stuff, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, because it's not like prepared questions, prepared responses, right?
No.
It's just like very live, very on the fly. So
Yeah.
it's hard to like build these like big walls. Or if you do, they're like very clear and explicit.
Yeah, and then when you get somebody marketing, it just like reeks of that. Like, you know, they're pitching their thing, and then you've got like some academic who's just like, I don't, what? They don't know how the marketing works, and so they're just like, well, that doesn't make any sense because in this paper, and I'm like, oh, this is nice. So, awesome. But yeah, it's a lot of like, well, they were talking about like a lot of, yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyways, methodologically wise though, like the type of interface that we're talking about building or, you know, dreaming up or whatever, is like a framework for building these kinds of things that would create like very interesting data sets, right? That then feeding these, like working with machine intelligences down the road once these data, like, because we're starting to we are building it for humans to better understand, like, and to work with the relational quantity. And if you have information that is built from that perspective, rather than just like, you know, there's a thing on the screen and draw a box around it, right? Which is fine, you know, like, there's value in this kind of thing. So if there is a tool set to build these things quickly, I think there are a few like market companies that are doing this, like Scale.ai has this thing called Nucleus that seems to be sort of moving in that direction, but I don't have an understanding enough of the landscape to fully get it. But there might be sort of UI patterns in there to poke around with. Anyhow.
Yeah, the thought of basically creating the instead of I always think back to Photoshop where you flatten all your layers down, like you have the final result, but then like it's like just one perspective. Essentially, it's flat, and then instead you're creating like the real raw. You're recording in raw basically, and not just high quality, but like individual layers and
individual layers from individual people connected in space.
That's is like a order of magnitude more useful, I think.
Yeah. So we'll come back to all that stuff. I mean, there's so much ground to cover here. Like, I think I'm sort of sketching out like the place that like Kristen and I have been playing over the past little bit since we're working on this nonstop. So there's like a lot of ground getting covered, and then we hung out with Sharuz. So like teeing up like what we may like get into on Wednesday is probably good here.
Great,
that would be.
So the missing piece that Sharuz, or one of the missing pieces, there's probably 10,000 more of them, but a fundamental piece in this was like sort of the more I understand about how this like technological layer is working and like where things are coming, like you've got all this machine learning stuff, and then you have all this blockchain stuff, and then, you know, you have these like this relational graph stuff or whatever, and it's all sort of coming to a head somewhere, right? But like, how do you like sort of, and the area of play is enormous in this. Like there's so much low hanging fruit, and the level of complexity in like building these things is pretty high, right? And normally you'd like build a company and raise money and like, you know, try to throw your weight at, you know, some narrow slice of the thing that has a market opportunity. But we don't, like, that world is fine and it's good for solving certain types of problems, but I'm not really interested in building in that way. So you have the sort of crypto ecosystem where like there are these built-in, like, so what was it? Jordan Hall calls them like self-organizing collective intelligences. Subsidies, and basically there is like an engine involved and an incentive structure and these kinds of things, and then like the playing the game gets you, you know, the ecosystem, and designing that game is what's like important, and the bounds of the game and the constraints and the incentive structures and the roles and all of this stuff. And so Sharuz so he came up through entertainment tech, and this is my understanding. He'll explain, you know, in better detail, but this is how I'm basically understanding it. You know, it sort of playing with the idea, sort of game logic. Like he really enjoys game shows and like reality shows, and like, you know, putting together sort of interactive content, and like the world of ARGs. I don't know if you know about this stuff. Like QAnon is effectively an ARG, like an alternate reality game, where you're role playing, and like they're massive scale, and then the community builds artifacts and mythology and all of this stuff that moves the gameplay forward. And I don't fully understand that world too, you know, but it comes from gaming, right? And so he is doing these experiments, which he'll explain, like in, you know, using token systems and this other stuff to incent different styles of play and decision making, and like doing things with NFTs where you're like betting them and they get burned, and like that increases the value of the final NFT, these kinds of like game mechanics. And so
that's a factor I have not considered at all. The destruction, shredding,
all these things like these methods, there is open playing field for coming up with this kind of stuff. And he is directly interested in utilizing, you know, Web3 stuff to play these kinds of games. And, you know, we are playing these games. We are role playing. We are doing this stuff like black boxing things, and this that directly connects to this. So the place that from the discussion with him, and like Kristen and I have been going over a bunch of stuff, we landed on basically, you know, we're like sort of nominally working on this project that I'm calling like relational OS, but who knows what that is, right? That's just since I'm a product designer, I like to put this is how I see the world. So
it needs a reference.
Exactly. And, but like, how does that thing get made? And all of the component parts that need to fill in this, they're, you know, file systems and, you know, storage and compute and processing and labeling and all of these things, right? And like, how do you incent a decentralized distributed group to like help make these things based on their area of interest and expertise, right? And then so this gaming stuff popped up, and then I was thinking about how you guys did Interhacked, like, and that model brought a lot of, you know, types of nerds together to play with these kinds of things. So I think game mechanics are how you do this. You create a game that people can play that builds the thing, right?
Yep.
And then take the model of entertainment and start building in seasonality, right? So that you can, like, we are playing, you know, so there's the way that you design this is designing good bounds around the field of play to produce the initial componentry to move the game forward to the next season, right? And then this is also collecting the types of people that like have the certain characteristics that can help build the field of play as it moves along. And then an incentive structure, probably through some crypto thing that has like an internal economy, so that like there is some exchange of property or goods or whatever the hell it is, right? Like, and then this thing can be relatively fun. And the biggest part of this is sort of designing the constraints properly, maybe even building in a design fiction so that like there's a narrative structure or something that this is where we are building the next relational OS, and this gives you the possibility of doing this, and then like sort of hype it up a little bit. But not towards building but building a new reality, right? And then, you know, there are roles in this. And then the one piece that I want to throw in, because I like it, is I think that there's a role for elders in this, like people for whom wisdom, like, because the leadership should be like oriented towards wisdom on this thing. And I'm sort of tacking this on, I guess, because I like it. But because how do you keep the thing moving in a direction that is like suitable to the task so that it doesn't suffer from market capture, right? And also, how do you include like older folks in this so it's not just, you know, 40 like Web 2 and younger people like just cranking away making a million things, right?
Yeah.
Like there has to be some layer of wisdom in this thing. And so I think because there's all of these people out there, but they can't lead it. The older people can't lead this thing. The younger folks need to, because they have an embedded understanding of the environmental like concern, you know. So anyways, there's these game mechanics. I should have just left that out, but here we are.
Well, I think I kind of get what you're saying in the sense that
Yeah.
you need some group of people to sort of like act as control rods in the nuclear reactor, so to speak, because otherwise you have like a bunch of people come in from a subreddit and all of a sudden they've completely like shoehorned and like redirected it elsewhere. And it's like, I mean, similar to how I think open source is managed, where you have like older contributors not vetoing, but like definitely exerting some level of influence to sort of try and maintain. But it's not like a benevolent dictator for life situation either, because you do need the ability for like changes to spawn up from the bottom. So it's some sort of strange like loop effect, I think, going on.
Yeah, I think it's styles of game design. So like social game design to produce. So the way I think about this is sort of like you were playing games together, and the design of the game is going to like move people with a certain like tendency through the play of the game, and sort of it will not be fun for people who don't like to play that style game. And so if you have like sort of wisdom centric games for your like leadership folks, like where they are playing trust based things and like shared vulnerabilities and you know, like working on communication, you know, all these kinds of things. And then for like more engineering centric methods, you have puzzles that will scratch that itch, design kinds of things, you know, marketing, whatever that looks like, and these kinds of things. There are styles of gameplay that hopefully can stick together so that you get a meta game. And there's something, so you are sort of recruiting to the gameplay by providing like well-designed puzzles effectively. Like, you know, like if you have a certain like if it sounds really fun to you to like do a black boxing thing about some meaty topic that might be like will put you into a place that for some people like is terrifying, but for you it's like a challenge because you are working with self-deception. That type of person is probably like somebody for whom like respect is something that you can reasonably offer. So anyways, these kinds of mechanics I think are interesting. And then so then you have like a sort of meta layer in here where you have people who are helping design the overall game. However, the individual games that play into this anyway, so I'm saying game a lot, so there we are. That's where we are, sort of field of play idea wise, and Kristen can fill in anything else I missed.
No, I think that was really good. I think part of what we talked about is it's the whole like building the plane while flying it. So if you're building the relational OS, will in turn help us understand what a protocol would be for other people to build their own OS, like that is also, it's relational, like fundamentally, like that's sort of like an underpinning. But yeah, part of what we need to figure out, because like Dave said, we want it to be invitational, is how to talk about this, and then what some of the games look like, I guess. I think
Yeah.
this is partially what we can talk about with Shrews. Like, how do we start narrowing that down? And then how much of this is technical in the sense, like, do we want to tokenize something? Are we instantiating something with this first like series, which is like, you know, I don't know, like, are we playing like 5 games or something? Is it a small like round of games? Like, what does that, what are the constraints of that? And I think, yeah, technically that might help us figure out, you know, what do we want to achieve technically? Like, if there is some sort of like, yeah, this is where I don't know enough about the tech side of it. And like Dave brought up the other day, not a DAO, but DO. What is that? What it was?
Yeah, I mean, sort of. So part of the mentality of this thing, I think, is like role playing as if. So the idea that like if we can sense into this being something that could be like a decentralized organization, which I think it can be. And then you've got the sort of decentralized autonomous organization where it's got like an internal I mean, I don't know the complexity of, we may be way above the current ability of these kinds of models, right? But we can, if we have a system of play that we're sort of just, we're acting as if like, oh, this is how it would be autonomously. Like, and so our sort of protocols and procedures or whatever are built around the idea that, you know, in a place where there's a friction that would be human mediated or what, I don't know. So this is part of just the I guess the philosophy of design that we're looking at. But yeah, like we need to do sort of small scale experiments before we put anything on chain. But what Shrews is saying is that like the layer 2 stuff is incredibly cheap and working now, and efficient. So we can encode all this stuff. He's building projects in this now that are going to market. Right. So yeah.
Right. And then there's always the sense that like if the output is in Web 2 and is not tampered with, then it can be made into like a real artifact at any point in the future, like as long as there's like essentially a chain of custody. Like I don't know whether that's open source with like hashes posted somewhere or whatever, but like, you know, like I do agree that leaving as much flexibility as possible and like in trying to use the entire scope of like the stuff we have now that's sort of working, and then essentially saying like whatever comes out of this, then we'll figure out how to like migrate that over. Kind of makes sense.
So I will say, like, I've been kind of like messing around with like Web3 today, like trying to decentralize all of my infrastructure for all of the projects that I've built, and it is non-trivial. It is very non-trivial. Like if you're not building with Web3 in mind to begin with, it's going to be quite difficult to move things over with because the infrastructure you're working with is like kind of almost fundamentally different.
Yeah.
So
like
I guess
some of this
is that more about infrastructure or information? But I know that the two get very blurry.
I think you need to define that a little bit more. So
okay. Answer. Yeah, I guess what I'm saying is like part of this is creating tools that talk to each other and essentially outputting very like a certain type of data that you know, at the end of the day, like is still just binary on some disk. The tools, I understand the complexity there must be enormous, especially when you're talking about like decentralized trusts and having like different devices talk to each other. How much is it possible to sort of like black box it? So just say we still have like something that essentially works, honestly, it has like it's like a real REST server. I don't know, you know, like something very, very basic. And the only thing we're getting back out of it is the data. Essentially like the pure data that like we can later, I don't know. It's very abstract in my head, but like I'm wondering if we can cut.
Are you saying like essentially like if you can keep track of the data, like at least that will be portable?
Yes,
in some sense.
Right. some sort of backwards compatibility, except like going forwards, I guess.
Yeah, I think I'm trying to like reason about it too, and like because
this
it's interesting. Like I'm having problems even with just files, like mapping files into Web3.
Right.
Like is not
okay.
non-trivial.
Yeah,
to me.
yeah.
Like,
This comes from my complete ignorance. So
yeah, like I'm like, oh, like I can throw a static website on IPFS in like 3 seconds, but as soon as you're like, I want to start mutating this data,
yes,
and I have like an API running on the back end, you're like, yeah, that still can run on Web 2, but even like moving that onto Web 3 kind of structures,
yeah.
like where do the files live? Is that storing on somewhere on a server still? Like,
so yeah,
it starts getting a little messy. Like, like, do you use DAT? Do you use IPFS? They seem to be solving fundamentally different problems, but both don't seem. I can't like map my existing knowledge of what an operating system is like into this yet. Like I'm like I want to like I want to like have this thing, and like that thing isn't there, so I'm like having to rebuild the whole conception of how I should be doing like anything. Is like how would an application like this fit into that, and I don't know whether that comes down to, is the data fundamentally there? Like, I guess the data fundamentally can be moved onto a blockchain, but is the blockchain even the right decentralized infrastructure to use on the back end anyway? Like the blockchain only might be used for some things. And then you have like a function as a service, like AWS Lambda is like, well, is that a smart contract? And how would you build a smart contract that serves the same functionality as AWS Lambda? Because like that is, the serverless concept is very tied into decentralization. But as far as I can tell, the closest thing we have is a smart contract. But it's like, I'm having trouble mapping those two things. It's like, how do I, have an API gateway, go to a smart contract, get some data out? It's like, how can you translate those things? And where is the database on the back end lying? Is that lying on the blockchain as well? Is that lying on IPFS? Where is all of this going? Because at the end of the day, you're like, I just want it to be distributed across many computers. And like, that seems like the fundamental core thing with Web3 is distributing information across many computers and having consensus over it, and maybe even deduplicating this information via IPFS or whatever. So how all these things are tying together, like, yeah, I think to some degree, like Web 2 is portable, but like, since like, I guess with Shahruz, especially like seeing what he's built, like seeing him, and like, I can link, like I just took a clip from the Buzzard video, like, or the video that you had with him is like 20 minutes long of him just doing the demo, because the demos themselves like blew my mind. And like seeing what he's been able to build and replicate with Web3 technologies is pretty impressive. So he has already the fundamental conception of how to build on those things. So it's like, we don't really even need to work with the old stuff anymore. If he's able to accomplish what he has, like he's like actually building like quite impressive like pieces of technology, maybe not like full on web apps, but like kind of full on web apps,
That makes sense.
So
in other words, the question of do things even map is not like, it is not clear and possibly even indeterminate, and it like the benefits are not obvious.
There's
I do think that mapping Web 2 to 3 is something that we should think about at some point, or how they interface. Like, because if you just build completely in isolation in Web 3, we might be sort of, fencing ourselves off from something that we don't want to complete. But I do think building natively Web 3 makes sense. And I think this is where, if we can talk with Shahruz about, help us figure out what we're trying to do, because you know more about how to build that way.
Well, and I will say, like, it seems like Web3 is more like, it's more backwards compatible than forwards compatible in the sense, like, right? It's like I can, like, multiple of my websites now are on IPFS, and they're being served via IPFS, and that is like fundamentally like totally a Web3 concept. So it's kind of like amazing, like how easy it was. Like I can set up a website on IPFS in minutes, and I don't have to think about any infrastructure. Like it's great. So it's like, like some of that is just like, oh, how do we take this Web3 technology and like just change it into a Web 2 concept? But we have already built the like mental model for what Web 2 is. So it's easier to say, oh, we now have these building blocks and shoehorn them into the old building blocks rather than kind of like vice versa, because maybe it's backwards compatible but not forwards compatible. So again, I don't really know enough to like really be determinate on this, and it is like maybe just a question to explore further. And I think that's part of what I'm trying to figure out right now too, because I'm just like, I had to take a nap before this because I was just like, my brain is blasted from trying to like figure out
I'm in
what
the
the hell
same
is
boat.
going on.
I'm rebuilding my design methodology up from brass tacks. I had to like empty out a ton of like preconceptions on how you stick things together and how the flows of information work. And I'm in the same, yeah. Like I have this tingle of an understanding, like you start, you're like, oh, identity is changed entirely now, right? Like that whole layer, like the feeling of the apps that you build, like like the data's all out there, and then you get to like build a lens on the data, right? And that lens can disappear and the data doesn't disappear, so which is what you're pointed to, John, right? And so if you can build protocols and structures for building multiple lenses, then you can continuously build your data out, right? And then you're on the line for like managing one of those lenses, which you need a much smaller team because the larger infrastructure,
they're decoupled.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like in a very significant way, like where it changes the sort of field of possibility, and because the field of play gets expanded with this, you need sort of consensus and governance structures that are native to the environment, right? So like company structures as they stand aren't, so they just break down. They're like they're too fragile because they're too hierarchical. So then what the design methodology is, how do you entice people to like offer to play in this area to create the most elegant solutions within like a place, and this is where, like, if they are generating data, that data, that generation of data is hopefully beneficial to them in some understanding, sense making way, and it can also be something that is lucrative in a sense, because they own the keys to this stuff, and that could be sold to other services, or however or you're opening it up to the, so there's all of these weird, it just flips everything open. So
well, the incentive stuff, so part of this is, if this is the first of many, right, there's like an incentive to show up to like build something in a way that the future you will be like pleased with, right? So I think there's something here where there's like a longevity to it. This is not just a one and done. And then the value thing, this is why I'm curious about, again, I don't understand the technology, but if there was a way that, maybe like we've been doing with our games, we're creating pieces of media. Do we mint those into NFTs? Do we have like our own like currency, like a token in like a system, because we're building something with longevity? And it's a gamble, like that this is going to be worth anything in the future, but it has the potential that if it was something in the future and you were in early, that this could be valuable down the road. Right?
Yeah, there's a speculative like aspect to this, but like the game needs to be inherently fun to play. If then you have like some piece of property that you have like an ownership stake in the playing of a fun game, that is a double whammy, right? So it sort of drives itself. And then, but you also then need to mitigate against speculation. There's all of these, this is where like there's a bunch of game theory dynamics around this stuff
to get quality play, right? Not people just gambling.
Which is why making these games easy to play and spin them up, they're social design. So like, so that you can run them and then people will try to exploit them, and then you're like, all right, well, that's where that goes. Like it's just going to collapse under the weight of that specific exploit. It's it is much more like designing a civilization than it is designing a company. really, like,
I
because you've
reacted
got,
too strongly for a while because I was like, well, every project is civilization design then, if you can like sort of boil it down to like, if you have like a community of people involved and you want some longevity. And then that made me feel better because at first I was like, civilization design, that sounds like really intense, and like all of a sudden like I don't want that responsibility. And then I was like, but if it's a responsibility for the project and as like a microcosm of civilization, yeah, I don't
they're little
mind.
civilization labs, you know, like
Yeah.
you can spin up little virtualities, and some of the economics and political structures and governances, like if you can make a headless one that, like, you know, has some sort of voting system or whatever that looks like, right? Like you get to play with the component parts of civilization now, because that's what the smart contracts give you, and then the flows can be mediated without middlemen. So like
Did I send
thinking of it from a holistic standpoint makes these things make more sense.
Did I send the articles about civilization design before? Blog posts? Yeah, I don't
Doesn't
think
ring a
so.
bell.
Don't think so. It's interesting, the like kind of scale of civilization design. So John, you sent me the interintellect thing
Yeah.
last week. I don't know if you started watching the one with Jimmy Wales at all, but I
No,
feel
I
like
haven't had the chance.
I've only watched the first 45 minutes of it while I was eating lunch today and like making lunch. And he mentions something about like funding structures in there. And it's very interesting listening to him talk about why they chose to go donation only, and like if they went
Originally,
with
right.
different funding funding structures is like, yeah, like, you know, if I think he gave the example of like Exxon Valdez, like you don't want like Exxon donating a lot of money and like screwing up the Exxon Valdez, like a Wikipedia article, and also talking about even having Republican and Democrat viewpoints on like whatever topic. It's like we want to come to like consensus as like a civilization almost, and those viewpoints both exist, but it's like looking more from a meta perspective. So I think like a lot of what he's talking about there maybe kind of applies similarly to like things we're thinking about, and like taking into account the thought that like he's already done. Because I'm like, oh wow, like these are like pretty deep thoughts that I hadn't considered. You know, I was like, oh, just like, yeah, everyone's perspective is there, but it's like, how do you start looking at that? And maybe that's part of the black boxing, is being able to like really take a more meta view at some of these things.
Yeah, and the structure of building this thing, so like is the operating system, or the stratum that you're playing in is collective natively. It is the term transpersonal has come up a bunch, which is like sort of the self is placed in and amongst rather than just individually, right? And so what does a transpersonal operating system sort of feel like? You are sharing all of these assets. You are moving through them fluidly, because privacy boundaries don't exist in the same way in this sense, because they're sort of silly. And like the interrelationships between your assets and the people or whatever, that's information that's important in the system. So what is a governance structure for that will attract people for whom this mentality is natural, right? Which is all people, but like ideology, if you are extremely independent minded and libertarian, like this thing will roll off of you like water on a duck. It just won't make any sense. Like, and you'll try to fit it into like, but there's too many people and they're too connected, and you know, so I think the game design can lend itself towards the attraction of people for whom this is a compelling and challenging methodology. But
yeah. Very, very vague thought, but one bridge to the libertarian crowd. I mean, there's the idea of Bitcoin, at least like as I understand, the first thing that Bitcoin brought to the table was its ability to define Bitcoin for yourself and nobody else, right? And so like you never have to trust anybody. You only have to trust that the code you're running is like the code you understand. And there's a certain element of like bridge building there that even though it is like, here's my castle, like I still do feel like maybe there's this angle of like, but I can build a bridge to yours and we can like communicate, right? And so I feel like, yes, like initially, especially seeing like the collective stuff, I mean, people with that mindset like might be like shying away, but I wonder if there's a way to sort of just be like, but you can also create your own, and like, but the core sort of like fundamental requirement is just that it's like, it like connects. Like you don't have to like give yourself up as much as like allow yourself to be connected. So yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, the multiplayer single player like sort of shift, and that's not, so yeah, it's not to say that this thing is like a communist regime. It's the opposite.
Yeah,
It's not that.
exactly.
It is taking the independent, right, and taking the collective and finding a synthesis of those two in a system that increases individual, or dividual is like a term somebody came up with, dividual agency, right?
Yeah.
So the stronger, or the more aligned and centered the individual is within this network, the deeper the network can be, right? And so what are the sets of practices? And they'll differ based on the grouping, right? Some groups are going to, but this is why we are trying to create game types that allow for this like multi-perspectival view without immediate groupthink, right? Where all of the like social pressures that we are coming in with will immediately try to move towards consensus if you are not providing context to like, and ethos, like, and like, this is the type of thing that we do here. But the technological tooling can make that ethos more possible, like, or even easier, right? Like it can nudge it in a way that, like, you know, if you do this type of practice through this type of game, and, you know, try this game to like, you know, reduce self-deception within this type of information, you know, you'll get a net, you know, reduction in self-deception, I guess, is one of the principles. I don't know what the downsides are there, but I'm sure there are plenty.
Yeah. One metaphor that keeps coming to mind, or maybe like an image, is like there's a stage floating in like the ether somewhere, and like any number of participants come on and like optionally like put on a mask that either like alters or hides their identity, or no mask at all, and you're like creating this thing collectively, and whatever you create is now like out there. Like, you know, no one person there owns the output of it, but everybody's participation is still intrinsically linked to its creation. And like whatever is then created is like this a play. I mean, it is a play in the other sense. Like it's like the output of a game is, you know, it's like, it's there's something about the identity thing really gets back to me, because that means you can come back to the same play as somebody else multiple times. And interact with alternate personas of your past, and still retain like ownership of them, even not ownership. Again, it's like it's moving away from this, like even saying ownership, but like this link, this proof, I guess.
Lineage.
Lineage, like I do, like, I hadn't thought about the that meaning of play, because we got a lot of that one's good. Interesting. Yeah, the mask work thing. I don't know where else to go with that. It's a good one, though.
I think we should go into FigJam.
Okay,
I think so.
Sure. All right, so there is I was thinking about this before, like how to think about what we're doing here. Generally, I have to sign up for this thing.
It's figma.com, so just go there first.
Is there an app for this, or it doesn't matter?
It's the same app as Figma.
Yeah, it's, what is it?
So when I created the board or whatever, it asked if I wanted to do, your
FigJam or Figma.
Let others edit this file with you. Only you can edit dress. Let others edit this file with you. Move it to a team project. Move.
I don't want to sign up. I just want to sign in.
Well, CJ, you should use your Figma account if you have one.
I know. I clicked the wrong button. and then it told me I already have an account.
Mm.
I wish it was like create account or sign in, but it's always just create account, or there's two separate buttons, and I always click the wrong one. So stupid.
And then I'll use the wrong email. I'll just like,
exactly.
Going down that path.
Soon this won't be a problem. We'll all just mediate our identities through our wallet.
We'll have this nice public-private key pair that everything goes under, and then life will be easy.
And then nothing will ever be a problem. I'm on view only.
You shouldn't be now.
Permissions.
Wow, what? How did you figure out how to do that?
Emote in the corner. Cursor chat.
Yeah, cursor chat's really cute. Yeah, I am also edit only, but that might be because you just need to.
So I moved it.
Let me refresh.
Not gonna work.
Did that work for you, John?
No. Not yet.
But CJ, you are editing it.
I'm not. I don't think.
It looks like if you click.
You told me to move it, and I moved it.
Yeah, and now if you go to the share menu again, is there a drop down next to each name where you can change view to edit?
Let's see.
It's vaguely where I remember it.
That's not what I want. Oh, you can observe people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Oh,
there.
Everyone should be editing.
Yeah.
All better. Gesundheit.
Thank you.
Does this work on iPad?
I think it does.
We'll find out.
Wow, I just I had my iPad set up as a second monitor today, and I've been catching myself tapping my my MacBook a lot. It's very weird. It's like
I do this all the time. Yeah. You can feel them coming together as a device.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So what I was thinking about is that, like, all right, so we're doing another joint practice here, and then one of the things that we could try to map is like the data structure or something like that of the media that we are operating in now. So because we can't record everybody's screen, but everybody's perspective, is data coming into this thing. And like, if I go off on the canvas somewhere, right, I've got my recording, you've got your recording, then we have the joint recording of all of us, and then we have the audio and the video. So like, if there's a mapping of all of that stuff, maybe we try to do that because we're in it and we just try to map it from the inside out. Also, that may not work, so whatever. If that made sense.
No, not
So in
really.
other words,
No, yeah.
All right.
So what I just did though is
I'll
shared
start,
my
yeah.
screen so that it is recording at least.
that's great.
Yeah.
FigJam is like a shared. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, if we each started a recording of our own screen, like in the future, if this was a system, and we're all recording our perspectives, and they are all linked in. So what does the data structure of that kind of thing look like, right?
Yes. One interesting facet there is that Figma allows you to click on somebody else's name to monitor them, which essentially means one can write a web script that just like monitors every person from one central source.
Cool.
And consistent resolution, consistent everything, potentially even like, zooming out all the way and just recording one outside layer as like the reference essentially, so that later you can like layer them on top of each other with some basic mapping stuff. And yeah, but I totally get what you mean, because you do need like just a global view of the canvas isn't necessarily that helpful.
No, a single global view,
multiple points of things happening everywhere.
So
Also,
they got that
news. iPad pen support is very not
great.
good.
Not a thing.
If you could see my little that was a sentence that I wrote there.
It's a lot of dots. I like it.
Yep. So that's
also it's very slow. Right.
How many Kristens can we get on the screen?
I seeded the pot well.
Yes.
Wait, what is that? Say something. Okay. What? I don't understand that. Do you see with the stamp button, and then you go to the emojis and you get like different emojis? Okay.
Ba, 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 ba,
Yep.
ba.
What is the one that's like a little chat bubble and it says say something, and then I don't know how to use
There.
it.
I think
Oh, you have to
doesn't work.
type. No, you have to type. CJ figured it out.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't
that's
know. It's just like live kind of thing.
Yeah,
right?
it's
just
so weird, right?
It's
Oh, that's
like a way
weird.
of chatting.
And then
Yeah,
it floats
the
your
cursor
previous
chat?
message.
This is my
Yeah.
state.
So
Yeah, there's audio chat, I think, in the paid accounts.
oh, and look at that, it just disappears. Weird.
Yeah,
That is a
good.
really weird feature.
It's a good pattern, I think.
It reminds me of Honk. Kristen, you remember that
Yeah.
app?
Oh yeah.
Except this feels more useful than Honk. Like,
Yeah, I
feel
never
like,
went back to Honk.
yeah, I get what they're going for, but just not quite. Like it's too ephemeral.
They're like adding an audio and stuff too, which is interesting. I guess everyone started
This is
adding audio in.
setting off my like OCD design shit like so hard. It's like, all right,
Because you're in here with a bunch of non-designers.
Yes.
Yeah, and everyone's just playing with the tool rather than actually.
Which is
Brown.
good. You should be doing that, but yeah.
I did brown.
Yeah, I need a mouse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, so the piping thing is pretty cool.
Oh look, there's an agenda kit.
Components, huh?
This is part of the
Wasn't
agenda
there like
kit.
a show hide UA?
Nice.
Wow.
Wow, look at that. Is that another
hilarious?
That's
Yeah,
another
like,
part of the agenda kit.
Kristen, do you remember like UNM built out basically that for Interact?
Mm-hmm.
That's like a built-in thing. That's absolutely fascinating. Like,
what the heck? This
Yeah.
is so strange.
Yeah, I wonder, because I haven't been doing any of the like collective designing stuff. I sort of jumped out after. Like, I wonder what the like norms are for async or sync design. Like, do you pick off canvas or do you like work on a little area together? You know, or is it like you're whiteboarding together? Typically, you know, you can have two people whiteboarding.
Yeah.
But yeah, interesting.
One thing that I'm finding with FigJam versus Figma, and I have not used like FigJam a lot, maybe like 4 calls now, is that these like connecting lines, they look nicer than in Figma, because Figma doesn't even have these. You have like straight line vectors and whatever, your curved stuff, but it ends up like these sticky notes and these shapes, they end up being like too formulaic almost. Like there's something about having to create them from scratch in Figma that like allows them to be a little more relevant. Like, I guess
like drawing your own primitives gives you a lot more like visual languaging. So this stuff is good for probably mocking up structure. But you can probably build componentry and then bring them in, right?
Yes, as far as
Okay.
I can tell, that's in the components section here.
Got it.
I guess I'm wondering like how hard it is to almost do that in the moment. And
It
not even like,
requires a pretty high level of skill.
well, yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, yes, in Figma, yes. I
How
guess
do
I'm
you?
like, there's almost a part of me that feels like Figma is a better
For this.
tool for this, because my FigJam calls have
It's
ended
too
up
easy to chaos.
looking really similar to each other, whereas each Figma canvas that I've used ends up like there's like a higher degree of complexity. I don't know, CJ, if you remember that one screenshot we made where we were just like mapping out the sort of hypertext stuff. For some reason, I feel like if we did that in FigJam, it wouldn't I wouldn't quite
Yeah,
have like gotten to the same level. I don't know why. And even though
I
almost
think it's like too playful.
Hmm.
Like it's built more just like to completely just like it. To me, this is like messing around kind of space. Rather, it's like Figma's like, okay, I actually have to like make something here, rather than like being able to just be like, things are on the screen.
Yeah.
Well, what if we tried to focus on something?
right.
Okay.
Yeah, like delete all this. That's a good start.
No, don't delete, but let's all scroll
Okay,
down.
okay,
How about that? Keep the evolution.
It is an infinite
Fine.
whiteboard.
Yes.
It's true.
Wow.
Okay,
Well,
so
I think we've achieved the agenda item for trigger Dave's OCD.
Done.
We can check that one off.
Nailed it.
yes, I love the check mark is very very on point right there. Okay, what am I like always? I guess what I end up doing in Figma is I start with text. What is relational OS, and then like use that as a seed. But then around that, you put everything, more text or like images or, and this is where like Figma was interesting because here I have this like propensity to like try and like connect everything for some reason. Maybe because it's so easy. Like maybe that's why. And not everything is like always should be connected or can be connected.
Yeah.
So if we kind of have like a word cloud going here, we have driven on this side. And again, like I'm massively getting drawn towards text. Like that, it's just it feels so like natural to me, and it's almost as if FigJam doesn't want to be text. And there's like this conflict I feel in here.
Yeah, but I feel like the brainstorming, like that makes, for me, I would brainstorm first in text, and then there's certain people that just will watch that, like Dave, and then he might start drawing or something.
Yeah, I doodle like if I had a mouse. Actually, I mean, you can't do much in this, so like, yeah, so like, part of if we were building out a structure here, like in text, right, and then something started to emerge where we have primitives. So say like we're trying to represent, let me pull that up, like an image or a piece of text or a thought or a relationship, like all of those have a visual language that you could generate or build. And if we are building out the conceptual thing, I can start painting that, right? Or somebody who has more skill than I do would be able to do it really quickly. So that's where something like Figma makes a lot more sense, because then you could design a primitive for an object that is an image, right? And an image that has, these relational qualities or whatever, these like plugins and stuff. So that's what I was doing with those
So in other words, you think the two can sort of coexist, and in some sense, like I guess people that are more text forward, like I think myself, can almost like seed the things for the other people, and then like when you create things, I can essentially respond to that in text and but still maintain like context in one canvas. I mean, because that would be the dream, right? So like,
yeah, I think ultimately like FigJam is limited. There's an upper bound to being able to do what I'm talking about doing, because you I mean, unless you build the primitives or components, I guess is what they call it. If you build them in Figma, this is where it might be a cyclical thing. Like, so you're doing pass offs because there are designers out there who can do this in real time. Like, you know, like, okay, we have this object. Let me go make something in Figma real quick. And then you import it as a component. And then any future discussion about that object, you have it in the canvas. So, but yeah, like, yeah, it's basically what we're trying to accomplish with this. If we're just trying to map, like trying to get the lowest phi version of a structure, I think that having your tool be lo-fi is not a bad thing.
Definitely agree. And that definitely touches on an interesting point, because I guess maybe my frustration here is that like FigJam is both lo-fi and hi-fi at the same time. And my brain is distracted because I cannot decide which one to stick to.
Okay. I mean, this is where we just create norms, and then we agree to it, I think.
By all means.
I mean, we can create those norms in Figma too. Like and
I think Figma suffers from that a little bit as well. I mean, I almost like I've used a lot of whiteboarding apps, brainstorming apps, and I'm frustrated with all of them. And that's not to say I'm just like grumpy about everything. It's more just that it comes down to like explicitly deciding how we're going to create something. Like there's the software doesn't really support that intercommunication very well yet, or none of the tools seem to.
Yeah, I've had this same frustration like every time I've gotten into one of these things. Like I haven't been party to like a really productive like whiteboarding session. Like I haven't been doing a lot of them though. But yeah, they tend to sort of, and maybe I'm just old and I can't process the way I used to be able to. So I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I think we should just try an exercise and see if we can learn anything from that, and then run up against the frictions together, and then we can describe the frictions as we run into them. I think that's probably good, because you have a much more fundamental understanding of this UI layer than I think the rest of us. So like you can, then if we all have the same felt sense of the friction, we can probably move in a direction to, I don't know, fix it or at least complain together. Yeah.
No, and I definitely don't mean to like say that this is not going to work. I think it will work very well. I think it's more that like I see these platforms with a lot of potential.
They're just not there yet.
But if we do bump our heads into one another's inside of them, I think we will. We're gonna like figure out where the boundaries of them are.
I think that's what this practice is. Like, we know that there will probably. So what I think we've been doing is like playing around with these different media types and like doing little exercises in them to see where the bounds are, like in what's possible, and then also developing artifacts so that we can like sort of see how we might want to tie all this stuff together. And so, because I do think that there is an interface for this that is canvas based, like the relational OS.
That has to be.
And it has a quality that is like infinite canvas, collective, and then the components on the canvas have like the ability to relate to each other, and then that relating, these arrows they mean something. They have actual data associated with them, rather than drawing a line. It's not just vector information, right? But yeah, I've been hesitant to go that far into the design fiction with it, because the difficulty in building these interfaces until recently has been pretty bonkers. But you get a bunch of goofballs together, and they can start building in pieces. We can start doing stuff. So I think running into the frictions here and then being frustrated and then expressing those frustrations is a good practice, even though it's annoying. It's a fruitful annoying. How about that?
Yes, I do agree with that.
All right. Well, what are you guys doing? Just, I guess describe out like approach here, because like I think all of you work with this type of information better than I do, and like my brain sort of shuts off in design environments because I am so used to building interface in these things, and like I mean, I did lots of like visuals. I used to use Illustrator and stuff like this for like mapping things and whatever else, but I'm curious how you guys use this stuff.
I have an idea.
Well, if someone wrote something down, it's like improv. So
Okay.
someone wrote something down, like John, I think, what is a relational OS, maybe? That John. And then that's the other thing. We can't see who wrote things, which is like exactly what we don't want for our system. Like who wrote that originally.
That's important metadata.
Problem number one. There you go.
All right.
Who authored what is
authorship
challenging. But then from there, so like what is relational OS? And then I wrote something in an example product built using a relational protocol. Again, you can't see that I wrote that, but if you did know that, you could be like, well, what do you mean by that? So in lieu of that, you're just going to ask, like I did over here with the communications thing. I'm just asking questions and I'm responding to them myself. You can ask questions like John did. Sometimes there's an answer, but then you just start. It's improv with text, I feel like. Yeah, and then CJ wrote primitives, or was that John again?
Not me.
That might have been me.
Yeah.
I'm forgetting.
And then, well, you just wrote primitives, and then I wrote medias, but also actions like blackboxing, which have metadata. I think CJ put that in there, and then media has relationships via people and I mean, it's just improv. Like, here's how these things like metadata. This is what comes to mind.
Yeah, I watched Kristen do this. Like my brain just it may work this way, but like this is like watching Russian to me.
Yeah, you do this with words, like spoken word.
Yeah. Just I am so over indexed on a specific kind of visual languaging that like this is fun because I don't know what my friction is here. So okay.
I think like I kind of have a sense of like I don't quite like, to me the arrows don't make any sense. Like I just try to just move things like that seem close to each other closer together, because that seems to like capture something like like what is like a relational OS or like an example product, like okay, like maybe an open data market is like something that's there. Oh, nice John. Yeah, this is what I did.
This is how CJ like uses mind maps right here, and I think this makes a lot of sense to me personally. Like there's proximity, there's multiple dimensions, there's colors, but I'm not sure what like language here, for that is legend sort of, but like no lines. I think CJ's saying no lines. I think like this is why.
Okay, so there's interesting. Yeah, so proximity gives relating, but so then what happens when so I watch Kristen do this when she's like note taking, and there is something that is a thought that's related across, like that shows up back to something else in space.
Well, the problem is we're working in a 2D environment when like these things are definitely at minimum 3D, at bare minimum, but they are definitely higher dimensional than 2D. And I think that's part of one of the things that's like coming into like Realm is they're like trying to flatten like this more hyperdimensional thing into 2D, and like it's good, but it's still like at the end of the day a giant like block of text, which I find a little bit like tough personally to like wrap my head around. It's like how do you move through like a higher dimensional space in 2D?
Yep.
Interesting. Yeah.
This
is where you need
would help.
Portaling, yeah. So
yep.
These open canvases, how they're designed now, like they're too easy to use too. Like, look how much shit we can throw on the screen rapidly, and like we're just like, we don't know. Look at this. Look at that. Like,
there's no cost to this, and
there's context that matters. So this is the two-dimensionality or the jump from 3 to 4, which at this point in time we're talking about X, which is not captured here. So like when John put the 21st century thought editor and tech map, like there was context there. So this means something in that context, but on here you wouldn't know what that meant.
It means nothing with it just
there's
there.
no replayability on it, right? So like there is a timeline for creation on these things.
Time helps with context too. Not always, but at this time we talked about X. It's like a quick
waypoint.
Yes.
But later the time doesn't matter, the context does, because later if you were referring back, you wouldn't say at this time. You would just be like, in this context we talked about X.
Link to it.
Right.
Yep.
But
yeah,
again,
which is a labeling thing. Like it isn't.
Time is an easy label. Yep.
So this is so it depends on the consumption of the media after its generation. So because we're right now we are creating like a pretty hypermedia object. Like if we were in this design fiction to say that like we are capturing all these streams and encoding them into some sort of format that is then watchable or interactable or something later, right, by other parties that were not at the place of creation, which is the whole point, right? Then it means that these things need to be structured in a sense for output, right? Like, so this is, if you take a look at a book, right, and like that is a form that like has a lot of room to move, right? Like you can do a lot with a book, but primarily it's linear, and then you can hack it with footnotes and appendices and tables of contents. All of those are inventions to use the form of the book in a
right.
The problem is that we now have like we can invent like a million book types. So like a bit of what we're trying to do here, I think, is try to constrain the form into something that is like exchangeable, right? So that we can have a library of these things. We can, or whatever the concept, the Web3 concept or new civilization, if this thing is if the internet is a printing press and this is our, like form, it's okay. So
I think almost you like APIs are nice now, but you almost want people to define like a product or like build on top of a format or whatever it is, and then provide a way of like annotation or something that adds relationship inherently into it. Is like you like adding relationship provides more value. So like have a way of inputting more relationships in rather than saying these relationships will be forever static and like constrained within this. So you're like, how do we expand that relationship out? And then like in a way, like I imagine a PDF, like you could have, like we have so many different applications that read and write PDFs and do different things, but they never talk to each other. There's no protocol between them or even like way of getting that data out. It's just like written again to the PDF where you want like a layer on top of it to say, okay, here are the highlights. And at the end of the day, like once you've built a highlighting system, either you add to that highlighting system or build a new one. And at the end, I think eventually like the best protocol for that kind of wins. Like you're like incentivizing people to define like good data set capture in a way. I don't know if
and then the totally viewports and the readers and writers for these kinds of things can proliferate, like depending on your learning style, So I mean, this is having this stuff immutable, and then you can just write it out into a chain and then anybody can access it with, you know, whatever. Okay. Yeah, so, okay. It's so much stuff. It's crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, so back to the thing that we're doing in hand, right? So like rewatching this, right? So
Yeah.
like this is like sort of trying to do the design exercise or the role-playing exercise to make an artifact within bounds that somebody else could like conceivably digest in a form that would help them understand what we understand, right? So the simplest version of this is they could rewatch the tape, right?
Right.
And like if there is this is where you could have like a multi-perspectival viewer, right? This is a very like linear time thing where you can jump between the perspectives of the players within that specific exercise. And you know, when something pops up and like somebody's like, oh, I've got this thing, and then they start building something or whatever, you can watch them build it, you know, if that's necessary, if there's information in that. Yeah, there's one bad idea.
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I don't. I'm just thinking how many people would study the actual tape. Like that's something like a coach does, right? To give feedback to the players. So you might do that to get feedback on yourself. Like you could do it for yourself.
So think of it. There is performance study. There is also like, so say we're working this out, and the meta layer of what we're working out is how to work this out. And so there is information in that. Like this is a good example of people in a canvas trying to work out a methodology for creating a relational like data structure, right? And if you are interested in that kind of thing, like reading about that after the fact is missing an enormous amount of performative information.
Yeah,
like,
you want to see the performance. But if you watch the performance, this is the difference between, like, you're not looking to see like who did what exactly when. It's more of you're getting like the feel, like you're watching a show or like a play. Like you're like, we were talking about the other day, Dave, with Ursula K. Le Guin, that one quote from that book, and I was like, what the fuck? I was like, is all of her writing like this? Like, how would you sit and read this? It's like a textbook. And you're like, well, most of the time she doesn't write exactly like that. And it's also more of this feeling of letting it wash over you.
Yeah.
So you usually go back to watch something without like this, I need to know exactly how it happened. It's more of you sit there and then you're like, oh, that right there, CJ said something about XYZ, like I want to put a pin in that. And that's where you would have a relationship to, like, that reminds me of something else, and then you start going.
Yes.
And then those things are related then, and you might even stop watching the thing at that point because you're like, I just came for that thing because I thought there was something in here about that, and maybe I'll come back later. I don't know.
Yeah, it's like the moment of insight. You're like, oh, there's a moment of insight there, and it's like that triggered something in your brain for a reason. And if you can add a relationship at that like time, it's super useful. Like, that's why I take notes. Is mostly like I'm taking notes on like the things that I thought were interesting because I know like I want to write more about them. Like I know there's another relationship in my head that I'm thinking about, but I can't quite capture it.
I think it's important like, for some reason unknown to me right now.
Okay. So I'm coming back to time stamping generally, like everything being timelined. I don't know if that's the right mentality, but like, because we are operating in linear time.
Time is important. Like, time is important in some dimension, for sure.
Yeah. And well, so, and there are a series of events that happened with a group of people, right? And then there is information in like certain slices of that interaction, right? And then being able to pull those out and surface them and then use that as an object in other medias to like build something that's more cohesive without losing, like making that non-destructive, without having to flatten the layers, like John was talking about in Photoshop. Okay.
So in other words,
yeah, go
time
ahead.
is just one extra piece of metadata on each
Yes.
interaction. It's not like necessarily the bottom layer. It's just like
yeah,
a layer that could be rotated, and then you just assemble everything.
It's like really a view on the data, because like you can definitely take something out of like we talked about things in this conversation previously where you might be able to be like, oh, like these things are linked together, but they're not next to each other in time, but they are occurring next to each other in idea space,
right?
So it's like a different transformation on the same set ultimately.
So I keep coming back to this, the like hypermedia part of this is the human voice. Like the conversational nature of this is the layer that is the most important, because it is offering a higher fidelity like view than any of the pieces independently. It can like gradate between a piece of text and an image and offer context on something that is 2D. And you know, we can do this thing. So like if that is the like, and so we're moving back to the idea that language and spoken word is the originator of our communication. You know, there's also movement and all this other stuff that probably came before that. I'm really vague here. I'm just trying to.
No, it's like the glue.
Yeah.
It's literally the glue. If you have an audio track from one of these files, you have like the most precise or perhaps comprehensive layer. Like I would much rather have our audio track rather than a recording of just Kristen's screen. I think.
Exactly.
Yes.
But together, they become.
Yeah. So I think it depends on what you're looking for, though. So Dave really likes the spoken voice, so he might be over-indexed on that, where he's like, "This is the most important thing." And then someone else might be like, I don't have time for that, right? I just give me the canvas itself. So I think part of what we're playing with is we have the technology now to collect all of the data, right?
Yes.
So it's just figuring out how to showcase that so that individuals can pick their vantage point or how they want to interact with it. And then they can choose how to respond to it, how to relate to it, right? It's open in that way. The games are nice because it's less open. It's more prescribed. So then there's like a level playing field because you're all interacting with things on the same wavelength. So you can this is where you can get like a broader, multiple perspective view on something because you're all doing the same thing. That's a different thing than if you just had something out for people to later come look at.
Yeah, there are coordination sync practices, right? Like coordinating a group. And the byproduct of that coordination will, if they are good practices, will ideally produce artifacts that are legible to an audience, right? So that they can be paid forward in a library sense, right? Like that is the developing those games and that lensing technique, like will hopefully give you these artifacts that so the playing produces clean data because there is a purpose to the play. So then we're down to how do you structure all this data? Like, because if you can create a protocol to structure all the data and like, then you can put interfaces on this stuff. It's chicken and egg with this, I guess. Okay.
I guess like for me, it's hard for me to visually see like what exactly the relationships are with the clean data in the sense like I feel like a lot of our conversations is like we're moving towards something, but we haven't found the language to define it yet. So looking through these conversations like right now in the moment and coming back to the ideas helps to develop that language a little bit further and just having the conversations themselves. But if we're to look back on these conversations 6 months from now, would it still be as useful? Or have we collapsed it into something? Or is that like part of the game we're playing is trying to collapse the idea into something more legible, where we're doing all of this like work and it's just like this crazy, like insane graph of like ideas things happening in multiple dimensions of time, space, conversation versus text versus, like all of this hypermedia stuff that we are doing. But we haven't really figured out the like real output or media that's being generated from it ultimately, and whether that be software or something else. Like, I don't know. Building these, like, the relationships in my head is like quite tough right now.
Yeah.
Right? Like there's so many, and like it's very hard to capture.
I think the place that we need to start like containing the complexity, like
yes,
around some primitives, right? And then potentially, rather than being in the high fidelity interfaces that are already working, like starting to combine those primitives using design fictions basically into potential artifacts, right? So this is like just creating form. So we know that we'll have images, we know that we have video, and like, we know that some of the fancier ones can be like a Figma or like document that gets built over time, and then like it's vector information so that you can store how it gets built, like, right. That's also just a video. It's fancy, but so if we can then like, okay, so take like the project that we did in Frame.io, right? Like where we recorded audio, like, and then we collapse that audio into a form that could then be annotated and shared together, right? Like, can we come up with some simple versions of those kinds of little media artifacts, right? Because that's something that another person could conceivably look through. They could listen to it and sort of watch the annotation. They could turn it off and on based on like whoever the player was, right? They could query the thing based on information that's labeled in the thing, right? So there is a structure in that you would need to organize to be able to create more of them like that, right? And then taking a maybe like a piece of text and then seeing if we can run the same sort of process on that piece of text. Like, does that make sense? Or do I need to draw more stuff? Probably.
Sorry, Kristen just like sent me off on a deep existential crisis here.
Oh, perfect.
Lost you
You
somewhere.
missed something.
I was following you. I was definitely following you until like I drew this little thing out here with the animations of base media
It's
layer.
fine. Yeah.
And I've had a moment here.
Okay. Just gonna flip these.
Okay.
So there's a base media.
Explain?
Yeah, so there's a base media layer in the example of the Rupert Spira thing.
Yes.
So in the first phase, the base media layer is Rupert's meditation, his audio.
Yeah.
In the second phase, the base layer becomes our own audio because we record it. And then the base layer becomes our commentary. And then anyone else who comes along later, they can interact at any level, and like wherever they sort of zero in on, that would be the base media layer. So it depends on context. It can change. And you can go back and forth. There's lineage, like that one beget the other, but you don't have to look at it exactly like that.
No, it's perspectival. Like the view matters.
Oh. Can you like I guess I'm trying to understand it like in terms of like
it's
if
like
I'm looking at blocks.
Foreground, background. It's like there's a
it's a nice analogy.
Yeah. So if you take a picture, you can focus on something closer versus further, and it gives you a totally different look at the thing. When it's with media like this or information, it just, when you focus on one thing versus the other, there's so much that happens. It's not just what it looks like. It's like you can have like I just did with John, where he's like, what the like, oh, okay, that just opened up this whole thing.
Yeah, so defining your contexts gives you your alternate view, and the relationships can give you these contexts, right? So
yes. The relationships allow for context to be made. And this is where I think I don't know if that makes sense, but this is where
Yep.
the query-based kind of
Yep.
interaction with an operating system like this comes into play, because you as the actor in the system, the user in the system, can come in and like, you kind of have a feel for what you're looking for. It's like a felt sense. So you can start, if we can design the queries for, I think this was the base layer, or I think these were the relational thing, something like that, to help find the context you're looking for. So you build context in order to search the data. Because if you don't build context to search the data, and we have the technological capacity to have all of the data, you're just going to get back like
big data problem.
Yeah,
Yep.
like Dave and
Yep.
I were talking about Google. Like Google just spits back all of like, here's a list of all the things. We can't really do that. That would be crazy. So you need to,
Right.
so that's the garbage in, garbage out. So in this sense, garbage in would be the query. So don't make it garbage, make it more useful. Give it an ecosystem. Show me information in this ecosystem. You could probably still do the list-based thing too. 'Cause some people
That's just
will
another
go
view.
crazy. I just need to find this one thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, because all these things ultimately could be listed out like files, right? And like, you could take a piece of this thing and then draw a rectangle around it, and then run a transform that says turn this into a PNG, and then that PNG has a name. And if you needed a list of all the PNGs, right? I mean, it's a layer, but it's just real thin. So. Yeah, it is about these, like, defining the ground, the base media layer, right? Like, going into the system. Yeah, I'm going to jump to like flows. I don't know if that's helpful right now. Plus my brain's starting to turn off.
I feel it. Is there ever going to be a base layer besides Unix time?
Oh, like a one base layer that is like to rule them all, like that everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
I think
even
no,
Unix
they're all
isn't going to work
yeah.
eventually.
Well, this is the thing. Like, I
Maybe
think
time.
this is where we're going back to time, because it's a constant that we can agree on. But
Yes.
but I think it is dependent on perspective. So, like, how do you want to encounter the sphere of media that you're in, your information that you're interacting with? Like, so, just pick a starting point, right? Like, if I'm thinking about like a sort of practical example, like trying to figure out how I've made my way to finding that Rupert Spiria meditation, right? So it started with an impulse to understand meditation, right? And then it led me to Sam Harris, and then it took like 90 days of practice to develop a sensitivity to what meditation was. And then in researching the field of meditation, right? Like, I was doing like Google searches that are like, he'll mention a term or something like Dzogchen, and then Dzogchen has the feature of being a non-dual practice. And then I went and I'm like, okay, so I have this keyword now. I went and searched. I'm like, what other media possibly are out there, because there aren't enough apps, right? So I'm like, YouTube has a lot of like videos, and maybe there are like, I had the insight that like there's probably like guided meditations on YouTube. So I searched non-dual, and then Rupert Spear pops up, and I'm like, it says non-dual whatever, and then I'd heard his name somewhere in the past, but who knows where. And then I do this meditation, and then I get this insight, and then 2 years later we do it together. So there's like, like, this is how this stuff works. And what is the relationship between all of those events, right? And the path of moving through these things, right? It is a pretty.
That is the context.
Yes. Like, and you're closing context over and over. Non-dual.
Yes.
Meditation. Right. And like, we can do this as humans, and we can do this as like a small collective. We're moving through. like, what do you know about this? Like, all right, or what does this bring up in you when you do this practice? And then here's a bunch of new rabbit holes that one of them might be the thing that, you know, somebody was looking for, and then you all chase that rabbit for a while, or not, or anyways. So I don't know if that helped at all, but
it did.
Okay.
I don't know
think
why. It'd be difficult for me to pull back the way I've usually come across media. Like, it's so you know, I like seeing that evolution. I don't know if I could always like reverse trace that easily.
I think that these are the like sort of graph algorithms of searching. Like there is some mechanism here that can be trained that and then everybody has their different sort of mechanisms that they've created by being in the information sphere, like how you find what is relevant to you, right? And then some of these are replicable paths that can be taught and exchanged and, you know, shared or whatever, and enacted together. This is where, if you can encode these into games that you can play together or solo, then like you can sort of learn how to create your own. So yeah, but there's a language in there. There's some structure to this that allows the movement through like information to, like, because I don't, you know, I don't know.
In other words, it's not just like a bidirectional link. There needs to be more metadata associated with it. You can't just derive
it's not just directional.
Yeah. Because everybody's path is so radically different. But
like
you just need adjacent data.
So like, what are example queries? Like CJ and I think John threw in here too, came up with a few different ones, and immediately you could see like CJ came up with like really specific, like pictures from my first trip to Red Rock. What did I climb? What was my first multi-pitch experience? Like he had like, there's like an answer there. Go find it, like bring it back. Which is like specific. There's a known entity out there, and then there's an unknown entity. There's something we talked about once, and I feel something that I want to return to, but don't know what.
Yep.
So show me all content with audio that like, maybe like that's the base layer that moved to written, because I have this felt sense that was it, from interdependence with the video component. That's all.
Right.
And then we could put in like other parameters like date and time and stuff like that.
Gives you a set to search through at that point. It's manageable.
Or what are like other videos? Within
the more you add is better, right?
Yes.
But you also there's a weird like fuzziness to it too, where if you add too much, it's like you get nothing, and you're like, oh shit, well I definitely know this is there. So then it's like
then you start subtracting.
Yeah, and it's like, where do the relationships of like and or like you know, is it like all or like all and, or you know, like where does that come into play? Because like the brain will naturally like just start like iterating through these, like, or like in parallel, not really iterating, like in parallel, try to like find all of these at once, like all of the different possible things, and then find a relevant score for what's coming out. It seems like.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think once we start building in this way, and like obviously like enacting this, it'll become more clear how to both figure out how to design or build the metadata or structures around it based on how you're searching for things, because that's part of it. This is the garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
We don't know exactly. Yeah, but they go together. Like this is it's both like it's chicken and the egg over and over and over again with this project. I have to jump
and
out
I
soon.
think I think some of like these searches too like will lead, like it's like just interesting questions through a problem space, and exploring like data itself is like, because you know, if I'm looking for certain how do I explain? It's like when you start looking at data, you're like, oh, like I want to look at this data in a different way. Like And then you just keep like iterating over it, and it's really like stemming from these questions. So if you can like ask these questions and just get the data set you want back, is so helpful for like exploration itself.
Yeah.
And I think the graph definitely like helps this. And I remember again, like the Neo4j, like I forget, Bloom or whatever, is like you have like a node, and then you can like start expanding the graph out. And it's like, oh, like if I could literally do that and like generalize that, so it's not like, okay, nodes of this type, expand them out in this way, and boom, like now I have my data set. Like that would be so useful to program on top of. And like now, can you describe that path that you got there in words? And if you can connect those two things, well, now you've built like something at least very powerful for data exploration.
So yeah, whatever the play I did, like just walk through on the Sam Harris to Rupert Spear or whatever, like it's effectively a queer, you know, like there's something in the ability to interact with the computer, like this is related to that, and I know that there's a relation here, but that's all I know. I know that these things are related, but I don't know what is out past the bounds of like past that relationship. So show me some things that are related to this area, and then let me, like, I tend to like things that are audio, or I tend to like things from this other coordination point that I'm going to bring in, right? Like in the past, this type of information has been useful to me. Show me all of the things that you know about in this relational structure. And that can be described like pretty in language pretty easily.
You can also do lineage searches too. Show me how I got here, and then based on weight of like how other people related to this. So you could go through and be like, there's like gravity wells in places because like more people are into Rupert Spira and whatever, like you can sort of trace things like, how did I get to this
right
thought?
People being into Rupert Spira is what matters, like coordinating against known trusted actors rather than popularity, because popularity is what we can measure now, like on YouTube, but it's an anti-signal in a lot of ways. So like, how do you build your sense making based on trusted actors? And if you mark somebody as a trusted actor in your information system, which will change over time as you understand things, then your weighting will change, right? So like, give me like, you know, sources that Daniel Schmachtenberger has vetted, you know, or has like, you know, cited or whatever it is, and then preference those above like, you know, Kim Kardashian. Or flip it if you're looking for something else.
You could
or show me things that this person, like, do not show me things that this person has interacted with.
Or remove the weight of like
of that,
like this person or this type of people, or add weight to like the interdependence group, like show it to me through their lens, basically.
Or show me,
we just want everything.
I mean,
but I think it's like all things that go into like building the fundamental structure, and it's like what does that look like? How does that like evolve from all these things? Because I think ultimately, like, I don't know how I see it, is like we're just asking things about the brain. Like these are all things that our brain does naturally, and are like, how the fuck does the computer do this too? Because we need the computer to start doing these things.
We're doing like
and ideally in a more distributed like fashion with more and more collective intelligence. So we can like expand as a society kind of our knowledge, I would say, and explore these different avenues and see what comes. Is like, it is like a very like important tool, seems like. I mean,
I think
evolution of computing.
Totally. And there is some like, there are protocol structures to these things that let people build all of these UIs on top of them. Like, some of them are going to be 3D, and some of them are going to be immersive. Some of them will be canvas, and
some are going to be text messages.
Yeah,
like
exactly.
Super basic. Like there's like no bottom or top limit to that fidelity.
Yeah, and like, you know, if the data is being like organized around this sort of standardization, that's not a standardization, it's just a best, like, just here's the best way, simply, not best way, but a clear way of doing this. Like, the rapidity that we can develop lenses on the world, if we can agree in some form, like through a consensus structure that's incentivized, like we can churn our way through these, because there's just 4 of us and we're moving through this thing decently quickly. Like you get a lot of people on this thing, and but you need a way to coordinate them.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know. I think we're making progress here.
I think so.
I agree.
Yeah.
Things are becoming less fuzzy.
Yeah, we're narrowing the problem space. I mean, we're doing the thing, we are enacting the thing that we are trying to build, which I think is a good
That's
sign.
very good.
We're just doing it slow. I mean, I like the idea that people will watch this in like 5 years and be like, Jesus Christ, it's like taking a covered wagon over the mountains to California from Chicago or something. It like, how did they not die on the way? It's insane.
Right, we're still using papyrus. I mean, like,
we all have those.
Seriously, I'm just trying to do it all in my head. So
that's why I have to take notes of what's going on in Dave's head.
But it is a delight.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know what is more fun than this. It's so frustrating.
It's very frustrating. I will say something about just having containing the complexity and just having images, video, text, audio, sites, and canvas-like docs. Like, wait, hold on. Like, that's actually not that much. And if we can just start building relationships between all of those, and you're like, oh, what are the fundamental things in common between all of these things, or a commonality that exists on the outside of these things. And if that is our human brain, then like that's really all like we're working with. It's like these, at least like some base level of like, okay, that's at least a pretty small set, and even could contain that smaller than that. Like some of our games are like really small, and that is if it's only text and we constrain it to only text, well then now we figure out how the relationships between text work. But now we say, okay, what about text and audio, which is kind of what we have done. With the Sphera in particular, is now what is the relationship between these two things? And clearly like time is very important there, but also text between people and like similarities between people that we notice, and like that appeared in text, but it's really a similarity in time kind of a thing, or like, I don't know, the text is important for capturing what's going on there and providing more information to what's being said too. I don't know. There's a lot.
We can create a small like petri dish of media and relate to it, and then try to map those relations. Like, and if because I think that there are like a set of primitives here, and then a set of types of relationship or whatever that can give you a shitload of building blocks, right? That's my instinct. It won't cover all of reality, but it will be the beginning of showing how this can work, so that other people can start filling in the gaps, right? So I think our role in this is trying to define the minimum set of a playing field, so that we can express like just the simplest possible thing that offers the most elegant view of this thing, where when people see it, they're like, oh, you could do it like this, and you could do it like this. If we have achieved that, then we've achieved our goal. And then we just put games on top of it, and then make it fun for people to do these things, right? So it's like, what are our simplest pieces of media, and what are our simplest relationships, and then maybe game. This is where my brain doesn't go towards simple.
I have to go
until I have my basic pieces. All right.
You guys can keep going if you want. I'll just.
Yeah. Well, no. I think
this is a good reason to stop. Otherwise, we'll just keep going forever. Cool. All right. Another good one.
Yep. Take care.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. See you Wednesday.
Yes.